And what that does is it really makes you pause more than anything. It, just taking a couple of hours, however long you've got, like to really go slow, to go fast, and that using that kind of tree of consequences allows you to really get in the weeds and kind of stress test it and go, oh. And what you'll find is you'll find something really weird or interesting path that no one expected from the original assumption. For me, when I think about systems and the wider context, that's not just background, that is the work. I think you should be data informed, not data led. That's that's my one sentence on top of that. Don't ignore data because it will ruin your career. Acknowledge it, help it inform you, but don't ignore your intuition as well. And this place kind of end up having more rats in the end. And I think when we think about this kind of stuff, like that's a great example of a reward system falling because the system kind of ultimately bites back. And what is the initial problem here? We didn't really look at the second order and third order impacts of that.
Today, we're joined by Danny Seals. Danny is an expert in experience design. He's worked for the likes of Accenture, and he's also the author of The Insightful Innovator. Welcome, Danny.
Hey, on how we doing?
Yeah, going well, going well. So, look, would you mind perhaps sharing a little bit more about your background and what you're
Yeah,
doing now?
sure. So I guess if you've probably seen my thinking if you're in HR or employee experience or innovation, you've probably seen me banging stuff out on LinkedIn as well. But my world operates often either kind of I'm working and helping organizations redesign broken HR, EVPs, rebuilding employee journeys, or I'm actually 50% of my work is in real innovation. Um, like you said, got a book, Insightful Innovator. I've got a podcast called Mind Chimp. And I guess I've worked for the number one innovation company in the world, which has allowed me to work with brands which have either got apps on your phone or companies that manage your money or other companies who have tablets in your medicine cabinet. So yeah, I've got a wide range of clients under my belt.
Awesome. And speaking to the Insightful Innovator, one thing that's really sort of stuck out for me, and I'm hoping that we can kick off this our session with, is around this concept of systems thinking. So, can you maybe sort of share with us what's your take on systems thinking, and what's your approach when you're designing or innovating?
Yeah. So yeah, when I think about how I design, the first stage of my design process is often what I call sense making. And there's kind of three kind of key stages there. Sense making of a human, sense making of a system, and sense making of a service. All of that operates in the working world. So I think it's really easy to overcomplex system thinking. And because it's such depth, right? Like system thinking has been around since probably the 1960s, I think. So we'd never cover it on this podcast. But I guess the best way I can kind of describe it, and it's the way I've seen it described. This is not my story. I picked this up from someone else. Can't remember who though, so I can't credit him. But imagine you're standing by a river and you hear a splash, and there's a child struggling in the water. So you dive in and you pull this child out. You're soaked. You're kind of gasping for air, and you throw the kid on the side. You've just saved this kid's life. And just as you get out, you see another kid coming down. So you jump back in, and then you get the kid and you throw him back out. And you do it again and you do it again. And all of a sudden, you're saving all these children's lives. Eventually, someone asks that question of who's throwing these children in the water? And for me, that's what system thinking is. You're down here saving the children's lives, but system thinking goes all the way up and goes, actually, what is the biggest system? Like, who is throwing these children in the water? Like, that's where the real problems are. Now, the problem is what you've got with system thinking is it's like, because it's so zoomed out, it can grow legs really quickly. And, all of a sudden doors open up and you're like, oh, what's this over here and what's this over there? And I think when I think about system thinking and why it really matters is I think a lot of the time people are trained to kind of solve problems in a very straight line, problem fix, done. But as you know, right, like in innovation and service design and play experience, problems are very rarely linear. They're messy. They're kind of they adapt and they weave. So I guess, system thinking kind of doesn't just treat the symptom. It asks like what's really kind of causing that pattern and who's benefiting from it and what's happening behind the scenes.
Awesome. No, I like that analogy. It also reminds me of a book by Chip and Dan Heath called
That's
Upstream.
it. Upstream. That's where the stories come from. Yes. Well done. That's
Brilliant.
where I got
No,
there. That's where I heard the story. I was like, that is a perfect analogy.
nice, nice. Yeah, some of my favorite authors, as well as the Insightful Innovator author.
Good work.
But
Thank you.
um, so, so look, yeah, that's my sort of take around system thinking as well. Is it can get quite big and overwhelming, right? So, in a practical sense, like how do you go about this, right? So you've mentioned sort of three pillars: the human, the system, and I think the organization. So how do you sort of go about this when you're tackling a new sort of problem or looking to innovate in a certain point within a system, if you like?
Yeah. So I guess, when you think about system thinking, again, is it Connecting framework, which looks at systems, chaotic and kind of is chaotic, and I can't remember off the top of my head. But it can expand really quickly. So whenever I work with things like this, I tend to try to distill it down into kind of some key principles or key kind of, um, I guess, tactics what I use. So when I think about systems, I have maybe four kind of things what I always tend to find myself reverting back to. So the first one is always around feedback loops. So ultimately, these are like the heartbeat of any system they are, right? So you've got kind of two feedback loops. You've got like a reinforcing loop. Often when you see it in diagrams, it's R. And these amplify change. So it's a bit like a snowball rolling down a hill. So, if you think about social media is probably a great one. So you post a photo, you get likes, you feel good. So you post more and you get more likes and it feeds and it's this loop. I guess in a working environment, a manager rewards overworking, people stay late, others follow suit, and then all of a sudden this burnout culture grows. So that's kind of like your reinforcing loop. The other one is like your balancing loop. So these are like more stabilized systems ultimately. So it's a bit like, I guess, like a thermostat, if you could think about it. So think about your body is probably a great example. You get hot, you sweat, your body cools down. So in work, a team burns out, performance drops, leadership thinks actually let's use a magic bullet that is well-being and things stabilize. I think, when you start to see things in loops, in these feedback loops, you see them everywhere. I mean, actually, our body is really good at them. Like we have these feedback loops all the time to kind of keep things stabilized, even without us noticing. So that's probably my first one. My first tip would be to kind of understand the loops, and I can probably talk a little bit around the causal loop system in a bit, actually like a map and what that does. The second one I think with systems is a lot of people think that actually systems fix instantly, and they don't, right? Like the best way to kind of see how a system is, you plant a seed today, but it won't grow tomorrow. And then I think in a lot of times in organizations, if you have to shift a behavior, for example, that result won't show up the next day. It'll take months because ultimately it's got to bubble out. You've got to give it time to the system is massive. And I think this is where people panic. They assume that, change didn't happen or the kind of the fix or the innovative products or whatever isn't working because they expect results too soon. And I think people, when they don't see immediate results, they think like it hasn't worked. Well, it's like all good systems, right? They have lag.
Mhm.
So I think, one of the other things is to understand that even systems aren't, because they're so big, it takes time to see that. And even in your
Right.
kind of feedback loops, you'll see delays, right? Like a tree
Mhm.
is a great one. Plant the seed,
Yeah.
and usually in your loops, you'll have like two lines which says there's a delay here before something else happens. So I
Right.
think understand like the feedback loops and the delays. And then I guess the next one is systems are weird, so they're not linear, and then I think you kind of these little tweaks what you make actually can cause big shifts because it's not just
Mhm.
a A, then B, then C, then D. For example, if you think about let's just say you're in the office, okay, and you swap desks one day, and then suddenly you and this other person start collaborating really, really well. You can throw a million changes into a system and nothing happens, but that little kind of tweak all of a
Yeah.
sudden changes something. So often when things aren't non-linear, people kind of, it often means unpredictability. So for me, when I think
Sure.
about systems, I think about that kind of test, learn, and sense before we even scale anything. And I guess the last one, probably on my top four, and again, this is more mindset, right? Like I can bring loads of tools in here, but the last one is around incentives and rules. Um, and like, for me, when I think about this, incentives shape behavior more than any vision statement does. And when
Mhm.
we look at rules, you've got the spoken, but also the unspoken rules. And these kind of
Yeah.
guide how people act. If speed is rewarded, then deep thinking often isn't. Collaboration will
Yeah.
die off because we're rewarding speed. If being busy wins praise and reflection gets buried. And you'll know this more than anyone. Even in innovation, if we reward shiny new ideas, that pitch or that prototype what wows a room, but we kind of don't reward someone who's actually disproving and testing assumptions and actually doing experimentation and actually saving the business loads of money because these
Mhm.
experimentations didn't work, then,
Mhm.
running an experiment that's failed early and saving lots and lots of money, then you kind of got to look at actually it wasn't wasted effort. Sometimes we
Yeah.
need to look at how we reward and incentivize. And it kind of reminds me of this great story. So you probably heard the Cobra effect be mentioned, but
Sure.
actually there's,
I think I saw that in your book earlier. So.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But there's a really good story around how incentives fail. I think in the book I've called it the rat's tail effect because people know about the Cobra effect, but the one that actually happened before them was in Hanoi, I think it's called, in Vietnam. So in around about 1902, I think it was, the city in Vietnam was kind of overrun with rats. So the government launched this kind of big bounty. For every rat's tail you provide, we'll give you some money. So in Vietnam in the days, it works. People's like all of a sudden handing these rats' tails in, and tails flooded in, and you're seeing all the graphs go up, and all the leaders are probably high-fiving, saying this is great. But they missed something. People adapted to this, and then soon the government started to notice kind of rats were running around with no tails. And they're like, why were rats running around with no tails? And what it was is because the folks who was catching them figured actually we'll cut the tails off, let them stay alive, and then they'll breed, and then we've got more tails to get more reward. So that
Yeah.
kind of that the end result ended up being that Vietnam this place kind of end up having more rats in the end. And I
Love it.
think when we think about this kind of stuff, like that's a great example of a reward system falling because the system kind of ultimately bites back. And what is the initial problem here? We didn't really look at the second order and third order impacts of that.
Yeah.
So I think we see that quite a lot.
No,
So they're
absolutely.
probably my four tips. Yeah.
Love it. Thanks, Danny. And look, you've touched on a lot of stuff there, and maybe I just want to pick up on a wee bit there around again coming back to the incentives, the rules, and I suppose things like norms in there. So, what sort of advice do you have around actually if if we're actually trying to implement sort of a change in innovation, whatever, like how are you going about in practical terms to help people shift in that positive way that is not also not going to derive those unintended consequences as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think for me, there's probably a few points here. Number one is co-design, because ultimately we're going to have massive, massive bias in our thinking. And sometimes we can't see the second and third order impacts, right, of something. So like bringing more people's point of view into that from the get-go really helps. And I like to see people as this jar of memories and experiences. And my jar is going to be different to your jar, and your jar will be different to someone else's. And what I mean is every single person has value to bring. They have lived experience. And, you know, I think for me, first, make sure you're surrounded by people who don't all look the same as you. If you're in some kind of, I don't know, call it a workshop or whatever, and everyone looks a little bit like you probably got it wrong. You probably somehow figured bias in there and you've got this favorability bias or this. So I think one is kind of find them who them kind of, yeah, who them opposites are. and who can challenge it a little bit more. The other thing I probably think about is actually there's a really good tool called family consequence tree. So, and what you do is you kind of map out the ripple effects of decisions. Okay, so what you do is you define kind of the action of a decision in the kind of the center of this tree trunk, if you like, and then the first order consequences are what's likely to kind of happen immediately. These are the branches of this tree. And then what you do is the second and third order are often each branch represents that. So as you're building this tree out, you go, and then what? And then what happens? And what might this trigger? And then you add more and more small branches. And then when you zoom right out, what you've got is you've got this like what looks like a river, right? Like all different streams going off. And what that does is it really makes you pause more than anything. It, just taking a couple of hours, however long you've got, like to really go slow, to go fast and that using that kind of tree of consequences allows you to really get in the weeds and kind of stress test it and go, oh. And what you'll find is you'll find something really weird or interesting path that no one expected from the
Uh-huh.
original assumption. And that's kind of what you want to do then. Once you zoom out, you want to
Yep.
kind of tag all these branches as like positive or negative or neutral, and then kind of ask yourself, are you actually even solving the right problem? And do you even know enough about the problem? And then that is where you
Uh,
start to bubble up and start to think about the bigger system. So, it's all about, I guess, context. For me, when I think about systems and the wider context, that's not just background, that is the work.
Love it, love it. And Danny, you've on form with some great analogies. This first time I've heard the tree of consequences, but that's a great way to sort of think about, just keep on going, then what, and
Mm.
to try and uncover these uh the second and third order sort of effects. Um,
Yeah.
sort of just coming back around, one of the key parts in the duck tree, or key principles in the duck tree model, the duck tree framework, is that diverse perspectives piece, right? And you're sort of tying that in with collaboration, co-design. So, are you using, as a practitioner, are you using co-design sort of for certain parts of kind of like a process? Like, is it for understanding all the sort of system issues early on, or is it for ideation, or is it for sort of like how do we might implement something? Are you using it at various phases, or where would it sort of fit for you, that main sort of co-design piece?
Yeah, so I use a lot of code design. Obviously, when I think about so my approach is sense making. Then you've got down this sense shaking. I guess it probably makes sense to just say what my process is. You got sense making, which is a system, human, and service. From there, you've got like this sense checking, which is actually understanding the data, working with people like naive experts. So what I call a naive expert is someone who has your problem but is not in your world. And we'll come back to that because it's a really good tool to use later on. I'll then go into what incubation, and this is where you use this dream and distill. And ultimately, this is playing two different mindsets. One is really expansive, one is really reductive. But you can't do that at the same time. It's like oil and water, it doesn't mix. You have to be very separate in that order. And then after there, I'll go into experimentation, experience design. But when I think about where I use them, I'm using collaboration pretty much in every stage. So when I think about the human, I'm going to be interviewing people. I'm going to be kind of immersive. Like, I was working on a client once and we we got up in the morning. So we said, right, we need to understand walking the shoes of this person. So these people. So we was getting around to people's houses at 5 o'clock in the morning, knowing full well that these people were getting ready for work at 6. And we got ready for work with them. We had breakfast with the family. We did all this good stuff. So we're doing lots and lots of immersion there. But then I will use that person later on to bring them back in. So I think what we tend to do a lot of time is we'll do this audience insight and this discovery, and then the reason why we're probably doing discovery is because we're interested in what you're trying to fix. So bring them in, like fold them back into the process as fast as possible. Um, so I'll use it quite a lot there in incubation. I'll use it a lot there. Often we'll have like a different card system to make sure that people don't show up with the wrong mindsets. And then yeah, like every single step of the way, probably barring kickoff, where we'll do like what I call a dare canvas, which is design a relationship experience, which is basically making sure that we're all on the same page, we're all going after the right thing, how to show up, how do I know when the project's not going right, how will you show up then? That part is very much like that's very much the stakeholders, very much the business there. But in every other touch point, there's always a form of collaboration and co-design for sure.
Awesome, awesome. So I just want to sort of pick up around this discovering work that you're sort of doing, and in relation to systems thinking. So when we actually come to sort of design, test, and ultimately, select some of the ideas, but um, on the implementation front, like where do you see that some of the biggest sort of I suppose failures out there, or reasons why innovation seems to have such a sort of high failure rate. It applies to change programs, all that sort of thing. Very high sort of failure rate. Where do you see is the biggest sort of letdown in this process?
It's a great question. Um, I think a lot of the time failure starts from the get-go, and which is quite probably taboo to say. But often I think what it is we don't ultimately align our people, right? You know, if you think about the business, every single person who's coming in to look at this problem, all have their unique point of view of why they want to fix it. They've got their own bias in there. And often we don't kind of do this, let's just throw it all on the wall and let's just get us all on a level playing field. So what happens is we all come in and we all nod our heads and we all go out and then they'll have whispers like, "Oh, I don't think Bob cares," or "I don't think, I don't know, Sue is aligned," or whatever else. But we won't say it open wide. So, we were talking before it's gone about Amy Edmondson and her, she talks a lot about psychological safety. So I think we do that a lot of time in discovery with our audience insight and allowing them to really open up. But our stakeholders are exactly the same. They all got skin in the game. None of them want to look stupid, and they've all got kind of often conflicting things. So, for me, I want to understand what you think about me before we go in there. So one of the activities which I do is with the kickoff group, with the stakeholder group, and I got this from a lady called Melissa Nova. She's fantastic, like she's a genius. Um, and she does this activity where we'll sit down and I will write everything what I think about you. And if it's good, it's bad, it's ugly, I will have it out with you and we'll address it there and then. So, when I was working with a large bank, there was this misconception that, well, I don't know if it is misconception, but all consultancies don't do anything and they just do like PowerPoint decks. And that was this kind of negative, this bias what it is coming in with. So you kind of need to knock them from the get-go, like not get them out of the way. But often the way to do that is just have a real open conversation. And then what you tend to find is as soon as you disarm that, the worlds open up a little bit more. So, a great one is when you're looking at system thinking and you're trying to map and make sense of this world, IT often don't want you going anywhere near them. And it's like, well, we all know why that is because there's probably messy processes, they're probably not lean, everyone's talking a different language. So be kind of like, this is my playing field and that is yours, and you stay there and don't come and look behind my curtain because I don't want you to see what's there. But as soon as you can get them on side right at the start, whether you do a design a relationship experience or you do some other kind of form of bringing people along on side, getting that kind of taking that time at the start. I think it's I want to say it's a Marines, but I think they say that maybe not, but it's slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And it's so true. Go slow right at the start, and you'll be amazed at how fast you can move at pace once everyone's on board.
Love it. Yeah, that's a quote that I sort of often reflect on, and it's sort of touching on some of the things you were talking about earlier regarding, that being fast is rewarded as opposed to deeper thinking.
Yeah,
And we see this in you mentioned pictures. So I'm often seeing pictures being done around with sort of student startups and stuff. However, sort of once some people go through the programs and that, their main focus is actually making progress on the venture as opposed to continually sort of pitching it. That's not to say that we don't need to be able to communicate and stuff, but I sort of ask myself, well, what is the goal here? Is the goal to advance the business and to validate it, hopefully, or invalidate it and move on? But as opposed to present the wow factor and the pitching side of things. So that said, how do you sort of balance all of this? Because it's similar in an organization, right? You need to come in and at times, I think, sell an idea that you're wanting to go ahead with, but in reality, we need to sort of do this actual work, and part of that is also the deep thinking in that. So, how do you sort of balance this and actually get some traction going? So you've opened the door up with some great sort of psychological safety sort of piece and a bit of, I suppose, respect for each other. So, how do you then take that forward into getting traction on ideas and investigating them and moving forward?
So for me, it's around identifying the wants and needs. So, your stakeholders are the gatekeepers of all your projects, whether you like it or not. Um, and if you can identify what their emotional anchors are at the start and tap into that, it's a bit manipulative, right? Like ultimately, it's like let me understand what your itch is and let me scratch it for you. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. Um, but I think kind of understanding them deep human needs around what that person really cares about, then trying to link it. It's a bit like strategy, right? A lot of times strategy is just piecing things and going, well, this aligns to what you're doing, so like let's just chip in together and let's go there in the same direction. Um, but it is hard. It is hard, and especially when a lot of these people kind of have this solution seduction, right? That this thing where my idea or what I am doing is better than what you go and come up with. And I talk about this quite a lot. Like we're challenging the idea, we're not challenging you. You are not your idea or your solution. You are someone different. And if we're gonna go somewhere and do something great for the business, then you need to be comfortable with that as much as I need to be comfortable with that. By all means, call my baby ugly, kill the butterfly, my wonderful idea, whatever, my solution. But I think, that solution seduction is a hard thing to chip through, especially when people are like, this is my lane and I will stay here and this is your lane and you stay there. I mean, for me, it just comes down to building them relationships, be really human centric at the start and care about them. Like not even just at a professional level. Like so if you look at say good recruiters in an organization, they seem to be able to remember names of people from like 3 years ago who they brought in. And
Right.
it's this weird kind of recruit. It's a bit. I imagine if I was to do a test on recruiters, I imagine they would have a bigger hippocampus because they just have to go through names, they have to remember them. But good recruiters still know the children's name of someone they brought into the business years ago. And I think there's a trait where we can steal that and go, actually, how do we be more full 360 human with our stakeholders?
Love it. Love it. So, Danny, you've mentioned psychological safety. Can you maybe run through some other aspects that need to sort of, um, in order for creativity to thrive and innovation in the workplace? So, what are some other sort of other aspects that need to be in place? Like what drives
Mm.
innovation in an organization?
Okay, so I might offend some of your kind of listeners here, but it's not tools and methods. Let me just get that straight. It's not like the shiny method. Actually, when we have I call it a behavior stack, but I guess let me go back a little bit. So it ultimately comes down to mindsets, behaviors, and cues. Um, but in order to understand them, we need to understand about what we're talking about when it's about creativity and ideas. Um, so I like to see ideas as like it's a three-tier system. So tier one ideas are kind of they're safe, they're familiar, they're just rebrands, right? Oh, you're creating an app. Oh, let's create a Tinder mechanism. Yeah, like that is honestly the first idea what anyone will ever say. So usually this tier one ideas, it kind of feels like we've done it before. It's a tweak on existing stuff, it's a rebrand, it's a familiar format with a new packaging. And these ideas, if we're not careful, they feel like a bit like innovation theatre in a way. They're just kind of like it feels like progress, but we're not really doing anything, right? It's just like, oh, cool. So it feels polished, but actually the next level down is the tier two ideas is a stretch, but it's still in reach. So this is where you start to challenge like assumptions. You start to borrow things from outside your immediate world. Whenever I'm doing incubation or whenever I'm doing discovery at the start, the first thing I will do is I'll take all my stakeholder group with me and my project team, and we're going on a safari, and we'll go to theme parks, we'll go to airports, we'll go to festivals, we'll go to hospitality. And all these things aren't actually in the world of, say, banking, but I can guarantee you there's something what we can steal from there and apply it here. And there's a really good story which I'll share with you here. I don't know how this is going to go down with your listeners, so please hear me out. Um, I was once working with I think it was a telecoms, and they were looking at actually how do we create this psychological safety? How do we create this thing where people? It was like leadership was looking at leadership, and we kind of broke down what leadership was into the DNA blocks. And one of them was like language. That's what it comes down to. Language can feel like I think it's boo boo and khaki, where it can feel prickly or rounded. And it was like, okay, let's see who cracks language really, really well. So we kind of looked at language and we looked at actually who teachers do language really well. They can seem to talk to a 6-year-old as well as they can talk to the parents. Teachers do it really well. But we ended up getting this the best piece of insight from a swingers club. Okay. And you'd be like, what? But what we found was often when you work in these swinger parties, if you're brand new to them, it's quite a nervous place. If that is what floats your boat, going there for the first time is like, what do we do here? What's the etiquette? What is this? What is that? And I remember we sat down and it turns out they have their own language. They have their own language and their own symbolism. So things like an upside down pineapple means that's your thing and that's what you're into. So there's a lot around symbolism. So we go, okay, well, let's take that, and then how do we drop that into leadership? And all of a sudden, that kind of opens up your mind from what leadership is to being like this, to being like, oh, this is more around X and Y and blah blah blah. But we wouldn't have ever got that if we didn't get out of the office. So
Right.
when I think about tier two ideas, it is that kind of safari and it's like
Uh-huh.
getting outside the office. And then, tier three is like the genuine, the kind of the genius, the original idea. It feels bold. It can actually feel quite uncomfortable at times. And you have to kind of often it feels like you're going against things what are currently being done. You're challenging the structures and assumptions. And sometimes you can sound a little bit weird and wild until you test it and go, this is not only what they wanted, but what they really need. But
Uh,
in order to kind of come up with these good tier three thinking, you need, you need mindsets first and foremost. So, I talked earlier around this dreamer mindset and this distiller mindset, and a bit like oil and water. So this dreamer mindset, this is the part of us, that plays. This is the part of us what explores and sees the world differently and sees things of what could be, right? It's about kind of nurturing them fresh ideas without immediately jumping into kind of that critique mode. That won't work here. That doesn't work. And there's a great study what was done with a paperclip, and they gave the paperclip to a child and said, "Come up with as many ideas as you can here," and an adult come up with as many. I think the child had like over 100 and odd ideas, and the adult came up with around about 6 to 12. And it's interesting. We tracked this experiment as that child got older and older and older, and then their ideas became less and less and less. And that's because we take that child grows up, and we put them into the confinements of the working world and go, "This is how you must think, and this is how you must do."
uh,
So it's for me, when I think about the first mindset, it's that dreamer mindset and really kind of tapping into that inner child and really kind of going,
uh,
well, what could this be like? And not asking, not being afraid to ask them questions. But at some point, the adult has to step in at some point. So you have to kind of change your mindset. And it's here where you get into that distiller mindset. You distill down what is actually going on and you kind of really reduce it down. So for me, this kicks in later on down the process, but it's all about refining and shaping and asking, okay, while it's great we can bring everyone in speedboats, that's probably not going to be a good idea. Can we not just bring them in a nice car? It's like it's kind of coming down from there and
uh-huh,
kind
uh-huh.
of finding them signals in the noise.
Right.
If you think about your child mindset, kind of, your dreamer mindset, coming up with ideas what are 11 out of 10, your distiller will take that 11 out of 10 and take it to an 8 out of 10 idea. But if you don't have that, and you only come up with an 8 out of 10 idea, your adult will take it down to a 4 out of 10 idea. So it's around going big first. So I
Right.
think them two mindsets are vital. And then there's kind of like three groups of behaviors. So the first group of behaviors is like more like ignition behaviors. So this is like creating that spark. So the first one is like nurture. So this is where, the dreamer often tends to show up the strongest actually. It's about creating that psychological safety and kind of putting a bit of a greenhouse or putting your arms around like a fragile
Mm.
idea, because that's what all ideas are. And it's about not killing it off. And then
Yep.
it's around kind of, yeah, this is where you have to nurture idea and resist that urge to kind of fix it too early. So that nurture is big. Curiosity is massive as a behavior. Um, makes sense for kind of surprise and kind of ultimately it's about, yeah, reframing things. When I think about curiosity, it's going, actually, what does this red button do? Well, what's under that stone? It's that kind of that weird curiosity, just being like, yeah, being that child. And then you got playfulness. So in that first group, that ignition, the last one in that first group is playfulness, and this is around dropping the fear from kind of ultimately the equation. Without this playfulness, the dreamer mindset never really shows up. It never really shows up. So it's like, how do you get these wild ideas? Well, actually, let's look at how, for example, in every single organization, there's onboarding. So actually, let's look at an onboarding. Let's go, what if our onboarding was like a music festival? And obviously you go, what doesn't make sense? But it kind of does, because then when you think about what a music festival is, there's excitement beforehand. You get your lanyard, you get all the gigs, so you're going to meet. Hey, you're going seeing someone at the main stage, and this is it. Whatever, whatever. So obviously you start to think quite differently and be playful and kind of make these
Mm.
ideas a little bit more sticker. But once you've got that kind of first set, the next set is around kind of exploration. And this again is about stretching that thinking. So novelty is huge here. It goes back to that thing which I was saying earlier around finding external stimulus and safaris and tapping
Right.
into these naive experts. Who's a person who has your problem but isn't in your world? You go and spend a day with a taxi driver, a nurse, a truck driver. You will get if you're in there to find novelty, you will find a handful of ideas what you can take and apply to your problem. So this is like that what if. And then next one is more around this realness. And this is actually ideas are great, but at some point we have to make them real. And actually going back to your point where you mentioned earlier on, which is how do you get that kind of stakeholder buy-in or how do you get through that? Make something real as fast as possible. Me turning around to you going, we've got this great onboarding app, we want to do it. Versus me going, here's a paper prototype, and actually this is what it would look like, and you do this, and this would happen. And it's that tactical feel. So, that behavior of actually trying to make something real, even if it's messy, nobody cares about PowerPoint slides. No one can feel it.
Mm.
Like try and
Yep.
make it tactical. Um, so yeah, and then I guess the last ones are then behaviors are kind of like momentum, courage, and commitment. So momentum is about not overcooking it. I think sometimes, we can kind of, if we're not careful, just constantly go in this circular conversation, go round and round and round. But at some point we've got to go forward. So start shipping things scrapper and as early as possible and learn
Mm.
as you go. You're not really waiting for perfect with momentum. You're just creating this culture of test and learn, test and learn. And then the last two is like that kind of that courage. And that often comes from someone brave enough to say, this doesn't feel like us, or if it's about keeping it honest, but also protecting the integrity of an idea. And commitment is ultimately, yeah, it's a glue. It's that thing of, it's what happens when a team says, I didn't come up with this idea, but I've got it and we're going to lean in this together. And that's that ownership and that commitment of going together. So I think, ultimately it's a mindsets and behaviors first and foremost. But there's one which is really big, and it's this signaling. This signaling is probably the thing what I see fall over in every single organization. I come to you with an idea, and I say, I've got this idea, but I'm not telling you how I want you to show up. Okay? So if I come to you and go, hey, I've got this great idea, like it's 60%, 70% formed, and you go, this will not work because of X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. You just pop me air. But we go, hey, well, listen, I've got this idea.
Mm.
I don't want you to shut it down. I want you to bounce it around a little bit. So we just kind of show up and go expansive with me. I'm signaling to you ultimately how I want you to show up. Well, there's time to kind of, distill this idea later on. So it's this signaling and like really kind of, yeah, kind of sticking in and just telling people how you want them to show up. But I think, you know, they compound, and the reason why it's like a behavior stack is because they are ultimately it's not like a pick and mix, right? Like a bit of playfulness without courage won't get you far. Curiosity without realness, well, you'll probably just spin in circles looking for more and more things. So it's around this kind of stacked behavior and ultimately giving things like creativity space to emerge. And yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. And then once you've got the mindsets and behaviors and people are like hungry for this, that's when you introduce them tools and the methods and again, even then you have to simplify the language, make the language kind of consumable.
Love it, Danny. So much value in there. And thanks very much for just talking a little bit there around the signaling. When I think about perhaps how I sort of um, introduce ideas, or at times it's not enough of that signaling and inviting people in the right way.
Mm,
And what I've found is it becomes very quickly a competition of ideas, as opposed to, hey, let's just play with something. So I'll certainly take that on board. But I do want to sort of pick up on a couple of things there. And you talked about the how children can come up with massive ideas, and look, there's certainly plenty of evidence around that volume of ideas often wins out against a sort of select hand-picked sort of ideas, if you like, select number. So we certainly try and encourage a lot of ideas and creativity and stuff around that. So how do you once you've got this volume of ideas, let's say we can get an organization to produce a whole lot of ideas, how do we then go through and actually sort of critique the ideas, which probably ties in with your realness, but how do we select ideas that are worth sort of pursuing, even initially, because we have to have a starting point. So how do we move forward?
mm. I think if you this is a great question because there's things like, you've got your traditional, hey, let's dot bowl. But the problem is, there's so much bias in dot bolting and kind of really filtering out them ideas that you've got to kind of come up with a real, this isn't like the Eurovision Song Contest. Like, there needs to be a steady way. So obviously you've got kind of, your desirability, viability, feasibility. Um, and this kind of ultimately allows you to sharpen your lens around it. So for them who might not know, desirability is kind of, does it really meet the user's needs? Is it something people actually want? Viability is can the business sustain it? And kind of feasibility is, can it be built with what we've got ultimately? But for me, I kind of think about it from a couple of different ways, especially at the start with this idea. So, you can score it from hell no all the way through to hell yeah scorecarding. And I talked about this is probably quite a big piece because you have to set the stage so that people don't vote for their friend's idea. So there's a whole piece around this. But having a good scorecard in place, having business uniqueness, right? Often the idea has to have some form of unique characteristics that differ from anything we've seen before. If you think about the innovation where you've got them three levels of, is it the innovation three horizons, I think it is. You got core, adjacent, and then transformational. Like it's worth having ideas here and there. So it depends on where in that horizons are you looking for these ideas and what is it you're really looking for. Business uniqueness is good. The alignment to the business strategy, the speed, the identity are all good kind of measurements to kind of start looking at things. Excuse me. But for me, when I think about this kind of other thing, you kind of, innovation accounting is really good for this because there's a way in which we look at ideas here, but then actually what innovation accounting does, and I think it's Dan Toomer, I think it is, who come up with this terminology. I think maybe that's where I picked it up from. Um, but it's around actually what's the confidence of these ideas? What's the number of ideas in the funnel? What's the number of them that we've stopped through validation, through kind of experimentation? What's the learning velocity? How quick are we learning? What's working and what's not? So there's lots of different kind of ways to measure this. Evidence strengths, experimentation maturity, there's lots. But I think having a scorecard in place way before is the best way to do it, because I think, the idea of doing dot voting and stuff like that, it's too easy to just end up having this group think where everyone kind of opts in for their favorite idea. And,
Mhm.
I think when we think about what we're trying to do in incubation and come up with these new ideas, often we need to give power to the shy voice in the room. And often that reason why that person's shy is maybe they're introverted, but maybe we don't know anyone in there and they're surrounded by a load of strangers. So that they might have the best idea. And if we're doing dot voting, their idea will never see light of day because nobody knows who we are. So we have to kind of make sure we give power to that shy voice. And for that, it's to kind of put in a process and a standard of how we measure these ideas.
Yeah, I love it. One of the things that we're sort of really, really hot on around, at least generating ideas for a start, is that bit around. Um, we use nominal group technique, which is essentially sort of working alone, and then you'll share it as a group. So at least
Mm.
there's an opportunity to surface quiet thinkers like myself, because I certainly know that as more introverted that it was hard for me in group work to actually have my ideas heard. So working alone, at least I can sort of generate a whole lot of ideas, and then we can talk about all of the ideas as a group. And then, but it is that selection piece that is tricky to navigate. If you've got the sort of dominant voices or the highest paid
Mm.
person, that sort of thing, people tend to sort of go that way. So it is a real challenge to be able to select the perhaps the better ideas, whatever that better means, but the better ideas to go ahead with. So, um, you know, that's something that I've sort of been aware of, and just really interested to hear your take on that. So,
I love
oh,
that. I love that, Bon. What I really like about that is, we hear about this, the Crazy Eight tool. And I'm not a fan of Crazy Eight. I'll just put it out there. I'm sorry if I offend lots of people. Because what it does is it forces people to work at absolute speed. And some people need a bit of thinking time. I get the facts of a lot of people, it's about um quantity over quality. I get it. But actually, if you're the type of person who can come up with four amazing ideas with just a little bit of time, we're not tapping into that with something like a Crazy Eight. We're actually missing it. So yeah, I like that way you mentioned, but it's like give people time to kind of go and think it through on their own. I really like that.
yeah, it's been super effective, and I pretty much use that everywhere in all phases. So any sort of interaction where we're looking to surface people's opinions or ideas, it's often do your individual work first. Even in those examples, it's real challenging because you got the fast thinkers that get their whatever 10 ideas out. And then they think it's done, and they'll and they'll start talking, right, and then the quiet thinkers can't carry on. So
Mm.
it is a real challenge within workshop and facilitation stuff. Danny, we sort of haven't really touched on this much, but would really like to sort of just explore a little bit around your view of how much we sort of rely on, or in your process, that you'll rely on data as opposed to your intuition.
Yes. Wow, what a great question. So I think you should be data informed, not data led. That's that's my one sentence on top of that. Um, there's a great story, and I'm not even going to do it justice, but I think it was in like Russia, and there's submarines, and I think it was Russia, I think, and there's kind of we got this thing on their thing to say, oh, America's just launched loads of missiles at you, and they're going to be hitting in 60 seconds, and he had this choice to either fire missiles back or wait. Now, if he trusts this data-led approach, he would have launched the missiles, and it turned out it was wrong. It was something to do with reflection of the sun on the clouds. So I think you need to. It's a bit like that thing with, go in with, go with your heart, follow your heart, but take your head with you. And for me, it's being data informed is your intuition has been evolving for hundreds and thousands of years. Like to ignore it is not great. Like be mindful that you've got bias and use the data to kind of help you inform that decision making. But yeah, I will always, if a great analogy is this. So I do a lot of kind of employee listening, customer listening, voice of customer, voice of employee. And if I take just the data, what I will present to the business will just be mundane insights. It'll be, hey, this data says this. But actually, the real value is when you start to really sweat that data and go kind of horizontal and vertical with it. And actually, a great example of this is when the last load of listening, we the business found that quite a lot of like a lot of typical stuff. People were happy, people weren't happy, customers weren't. But actually, I identified by sweating the data these 12 burning platforms. Now, if you looked at that data, you will not find that data by just looking at an Excel sheet. You have to use your brain and you have to use your intuition. And it's funny, out of these 12 burning platforms, reflecting now, six of them have come up to light. Six of them have happened. But you've got to connect the invisible to find it. So like that is intuition for me. Your data won't tell you that. You've got to kind of use it and sweat it and why, and kind of, yeah, cross-check it. So for me, you know, don't ignore data because it will ruin your career. Acknowledge it, help it inform you, but don't ignore your intuition as well.
Yeah, I love that, and something that resonated with me probably a couple of years ago is I'm pretty I really enjoy Roger Martin's work. It's been sort of big influence on sort of how I look at things and strategy and innovation and all that sort of thing. And I remember one of his articles was something along the lines, and I'll probably murder it, but it was like, again, similar concept. Data is great, absolutely, but it it just flattens, takes all the nuance out of. So I think he's talking about data analytics or predictive analytics, whatever. He's saying that your spreadsheets and stuff will just flatten out the data and take out the little interesting, useful, sort of really novel pieces and the nuance in there. And it's the nuance that you need to be able to leverage and create new innovation. So he was onto that, and that's kind of my view at the moment with where we're at with AI as well. So do you have any sort of thoughts around this whole aspect of AI and innovation? Is AI even creative? Because I think it misses out on all the tacit knowledge. But hey, I'll let you sort of speak to this.
So I'll probably get shot for this, but AI is just like this magpie syndrome. Of course, like, you know, it's it's the next shiny thing, and rightfully so, right? Like it is interesting, and the things what it's going to be able to do are amazing. But right now, it's just a shiny thing, and everyone's using it to create dolls of themselves. And like, so I'm like, great, that's what we're using AI for now. Um, I think it's really good at helping you crunch data, but it has its own biases and its own hallucinations. But for me, I will always go high human touch will always beat high tech. It will always be it. And I think there's a real big value play to be had around all these people are relying on tech and AI to do the job of a human. I think there's a real value play for someone to go, we're going to offer a value add service or a service where you're not going to engage with AI and telecoms. You're going to have this white glove service. You're going to call someone up. You're going to speak to again Sue. She's getting around in these conversations. You're going to speak to Sue, and she's going to hold your hand and go through this process. And and you're always going to engage with Sue. I will pay higher value price point for that than I will for a typical. And I think there's real value, and I've not seen many people tap into this yet, where it's actually I will pay more to deal purely with a human. And I think when everyone's looking that way, the value is to look this way. Um, but I think with AI, a lot of it is around best practice, right? And the problem is with best practice is it's average. It's the definition of best practice. So bad data in is bad data out. And if I think about all the random people who are putting some of the weird stuff you see getting put into ChatGPT, I'm like, probably shouldn't trust that. Um, so I think it's a good sparring partner when it needs to be, but it is kind of a case of you can't throw your whole life into it and say, do this for me. Like, and there was a great article I seen a few weeks ago, which was saying AI now is now making us bad at critical thinking.
Mm.
Like
Yep.
it's showing us now that humans were getting worse at critical thinking because we were relying on it.
Yep.
So yeah, that's an interesting kind of take on it.
Yeah, Danny, there's a heck of a lot in there. You could probably almost have another whole episode around that. But I certainly align with a lot of what you're saying there. And I also teach innovation at my university, and you get the sense that some students are just passing off thinking. Um,
Mm.
to AI. But you can see that, and there's been some studies. I think it's by Boston Consulting Group that has been the case, not necessarily for students, but yeah, I also look at that as a huge opportunity, and I'm also the same with. I think there is a huge opportunity for that deeper connection on the human front. Um, but also in the back of my mind, I wonder, is this a generational thing where um, even though everybody is human, there is another generation coming through that are tech first and AI first, sort of people, and they'll be used to that world of not having that human connection. Again, maybe that's the opportunity when they do come across something that will stand out as a human touch.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good point. When I look at, say, my grandparents, they still use checkbooks. Like, there's this big push at the front end to go, let's get everyone on AI. I'm like, well, what about the older generation? What about the people who don't know how to use AI? If I turn around to someone and go chat GPT to, I don't know, my granddad, he'd be like, what's that? I gave him Facebook. We set him up on Facebook. He did a live stream at a graveyard. It's like some things need technology, some things don't technology. And it's I don't know. For me, I always worry. So I'm dyslexic. So a lot of the time when I'm writing my newsletter and stuff like that, I'll put it in there to help me do spell check. But then I'm like, oh, if I just give what I wrote there, and like I start stressing out because I'm like, am I now helping this model come and it becomes this really murky ground. And I can see why a lot of celebrities, not celebrities, but let's say call them artists, are really worried about this because your image rights as an artist, your thinking, it's hard to not use it, but in the same breath, like we have to kind of turn around and say to ourselves, do we want to just be a group of humans at best practice? Or do we want to still keep what makes us creative and what keeps us as artists and guitarists and kind of painters and that human thing, what keeps us as the creative humans that we are? I'm just watching over here now. Black Mirror's just come out, the new season of Black Mirror. I'm a huge fan. Charlie Brooker, like proper kind of dystopia, scary. And they've just done, I won't spoil it, and no spoilers, but the first episode is around how they turn a subscription life as a subscription service. And you kind of go, wow, that's scary because it's far away where it doesn't feel real, but it's close enough to go. It kind of makes me feel a bit uncomfortable though.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I remember, I remember reading something on I think it might have been this kind of X thread. I can't remember where it was, and it was like, as AI, how would you trick us humans into kind of taking over? And it's like, I wouldn't do it directly. I would be there as your servant at first, and then slowly but surely I'll help you make one change difference, and then I'll make you help it and then do it subtly.
Mm.
And like, holy shit, that's scary. That's scary.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's time to move on from that. Gosh. Um, Yes. So maybe now, Danny, just to sort of circle back to the sort of, I think the three main themes that have sort of that we've covered sort of today is around that systems thinking piece, the whole context, creativity and innovation in organisations, and also the scoring ideas. And just wondering if you've got perhaps a case study or a piece of work that you've worked on that could either speak to one of those aspects or the whole lot. Just in terms of so
Yeah.
we can get a sense of how you've made an impact.
Yeah, sure. So, I was working with a global technology company. I can't say who it is, but they do vacuums and they do hair dryers. I'll let you figure out who that is.
Not that I need one. Not I wouldn't know. Yeah.
Fair, fair. And they kind of wanted this EVP, right? So for people who don't know, employee value proposition. And actually, for me, there's a big thing here, which is EVE, employee value experience. because I think a lot of time it's, we talk about EVP and it's just basically putting lipstick on a pig. So we kind of came in and was like, right, let's have a look at what this real problem is. And so ultimately, the EVP project usually starts with a promise, right? Here's who we are and here's what we stand for. But actually, you pull one layer back on that onion and you go and sit with a couple of employees and we go, that that isn't the promise and we don't stand for that. So the goal was to go out and create this kind of employee value experience. And it's really messy. It's emotional. It was everyday experiences of working inside the business. Um, so we kind of asked, like, whether, we sat down, we interviewed, did like 100 of interviews, did lots of A/B testing with kind of sentiment analysis. But we kind of ultimately allowed us to go actually using this sense making analogy and sitting with the human first. Actually, what do humans really feel? What's missing? What's there? What are we lying about? What does it feel like we're lying about? What do they really want? But also, what is it they need? Then we looked at kind of the service, and this was a lot of service blueprinting, going actually, how does someone join? How does someone actually get eyes on joining this business? All the way through to when they leave. How do we still make them feel as special when they leave as we do when they joined? Because a lot of the time you'll see that they'll bring them in and we'll like, you know, confetti and like, yeah, welcome. And then when they go, it's like a whisper out of business. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's a real shame. That's a real missed opportunity. So here we kind of, the first thing we did is we create these causal feedback maps, which is this happens, there's a balancing, the kind of what are the laps, and what you'll see is you'll start like this, and then all of a sudden you'll get loops, and you'll get loops, and you'll get loops, and you get more loops, and your map gets huge, and it feels quite overwhelming. But what it does is again, it allows you to kind of really start to stress and go, are we asking the right problems? Are we looking at the right area? What's the bits what we're missing? So the approach which we took was ultimately kind of like an eight sprint approach. So the first one was like kind of reframing this EVP as kind of a system what needed to be rewired. It wasn't a statement that kind of needed to be launched. And we shared like our kind of outcomes, and the language was a real big one. Actually, what is a language? How do people talk? You've got this external lens, but as soon as people come in, they talk different, they act different. Like, no wonder you get people joining in the business and they're getting org rejection straight away because they go, it's like this Instagram versus reality. I signed up for this and I've got this and they jar. So actually, we looked at kind of what was that language and what did that really mean. So the first thing was, again, them causal loop diagrams and interviewing naive experts, speaking with people who left the business, and we spoke with some people who spoke really highly and who didn't. We did a lot of sentiment analysis, did a load of social listening with Reddit, Glassdoor, Twitter, Facebook, to really understand actually what is this 360 picture of what this business really looked like. I mentioned earlier we did a lot of tag-alongs as well. So we got up with people in the morning, we kind of had breakfast with the children, we did the work, we did a lot of digital diaries, we made people record podcasts. So it's two people just having a conversation. And we broke down that podcast and I look at all the sentiment and the words, what was being used, and was this negative, was this not? What did that look like? And what this allows, again, it took us a data-informed opinion, but there was a big circle around that of human interaction and what that really looks like. Sprint two ultimately was kind of that sense checking and looking at the clues and actually going, right, well, here's the mundane insights. Here's the things what are like, oh, great, we know that. Dogs like to sleep, it's mundane. Actually, dogs like to sleep because they have anxiety because their human is leaving. It's a magical insight. So what that's not for this client, but like we kind of said, right, where's the mundane insights, but where's these real magical ones, and where are these ones which are like, wow, that makes me kind of think differently. So we used a lot of, like I say, NLP, natural language programming, to kind of find these kinds of cultural signals and these value moments. Then sprint three, we went into kind of co-creation, right? So all the people we engaged with before we got here all came back full circle to come into the incubation. We brought naive experts in. We brought people who didn't even work for that customer. Like we had all different types of people in here, from not necessarily lorry drivers, but who had no right to be in this room. But we did because some of the main ideas came from here. So we ran these closed sessions, and again, the incubation. So we had a lot of workshops, which was around in that dreamer mindset, and then a lot of workshops, which was in that distill. So you have to go do the dreamer first to then have something to distill down. And then we prioritized the ideas, right? We kind of used a scorecard. We kind of looked at actually which of these are really important, which aren't, and actually which score really high. And then we went into experimentation. So the first thing we did there was kind of test our assumptions on these ideas. So we built and tested like early experiments with kind of real teams. Some of them was really bad. Like some of them was really scrappy, horrible experiments. But it was to kind of just debunk it or validate it really, really quickly. And then we kind of measured like what was the energy engagement. So as much as going, this is a good idea, and we have this test group looking at this idea, it wasn't necessarily just looking at an idea, it was looking at actually the engagement and the excitement of these people seeing this idea.
Mhm.
If it wasn't this idea, there's something about this idea what's got them excited. What was that? Because again, it allows us, it's not linear. We might end up going backwards to kind of go back into incubation and whatever else. Um, and then ultimately from there, it was kind of went into the experience lens, right? So, when I talk about experience design, I have my own like framework, which is macro, micro, and meso. And that's ultimately looking at the real big picture, the identity, the transformation, these moments. And at the meso level, it's all about kind of the moments and the journeys. And at the micro, it's all about these cues, these rituals, this space sense story, like what are the narratives, what are being shared. And then that allows us to create an idea and put an experience around the idea. So, for example, someone joining a business day one. Again, I'll use the analogy of day one. We can bring people in and we can make them feel. Sorry, day zero, for example, we can give them a contract, or actually we can give them a contract, and then when they come in the building, they get this big chocolate welcome card, and they can break that card up and share the chocolate with the new team members and build community and interaction really, really quickly. How do we turn that into a ritual? So it's around how do we create this experience lens on top of it. And that's where we kind of, after that, we kind of went into this activate phase, which is basically just your test, learn, and adjust. So look at what's really lagging, look at any leading signals, measure the adoption of some of these things, the sentiment behind them. And then the last stage is ultimately embed, right? Build the system out. Look at these behavior cues, look at measurement maps, look at kind of the new integration of the kind of EVE. Define what great looks like, and are we hitting it? Are we getting close to it, or actually have we missed something? So it's a typical it's a typical sprint approach. Um, and there was times where we felt like momentum was really, really good and we was just flying. And there was times where I was like, this feels horrible. This feels sticker. And I think a lot of time when we talk about people product innovation or redesigning cultures and employee experience, I think people think it's this great thing where it's all just post-it notes and everyone's high-fiving and sitting on beanbags, and it's not. It's frustrating. It's hard work. And don't get me wrong, there's some good moments in there, but it's not all fun and games. It's definitely not. But I guess that's that kind of that burden of being a good problem solver. Like that's the things that get you out of bed in the morning, whether you like it or it's frustrating or it's joyful. Gets you out of bed.
Love it. Thanks for sharing that story. So, like with that example, what was there? Are you able to sort of share what the sort of end sort of impact was from all that work? Or
So what we ended up doing is we ended up going with the EVA. We kind of looked at actually how teams. So as soon as you look at employee value experience or employee value proposition, um, you start to identify actually what the burning platforms are. So what we identified was actually day zero to day 90 was a big thing. As soon as going from day 90, sorry, the first week to 2 weeks was a big thing, like that experience of it, make them feel part of it. Um, we looked at their leadership thing. Like, it's great that we get them all ramped up and we're excited, but then actually, how do we embed people in the teams? How do we make them feel part of this organization? And one of the things which was created was um deconstruction. So the brand have some equipment that you can buy in stores, and it was like, right, well, how do people buy into that brand? And they had this kind of thing where they stripped down this product and then they rebuilt it back up, and it was like this little mini experience where they could really lean into the product and feel like they was part of it. So we had that. We looked at the leaver experience. Um, a lot of people, your best people will leave at some point because they're hungry. But that doesn't mean they have to leave the business forever. Like sometimes you get boomerangs. And actually, how do you keep these people really fired up? Like, how do you keep them your story sharers once they've left? Because whether you like it or not, if you're in the pub and you're having a drink and someone says, "Hey, what's it like to work at your place. They're not going to tell you about the EVP. They're going to tell you the shared lived experience. So the goal is to create them that really good lived experience, which doesn't jar, and I think a lot of time people leave a business with a bitter taste in your mouth. So if you can nip that in the bud and go, actually, how do we make that experience feel like it was a ritual, a big thing, like there's a big signing off, there's a big, everyone stands up and claps, like walks through an arch. Like, how do we do that kind of stuff? So yeah, there was like 3 or 4 big key moments which popped out there. And then the business kind of has now gone through a bit of a relocation, I guess. So, but I guess there's going to be that what needs to be taken into account. But again, I'm not working with them now. Unfortunately, I'm in Dubai.
Danny, thank you so much for sharing that. I've just resonated with so much here that from that systems thinking, how do we change organisations through generating ideas and how we might lose that over time as we sort of grow into our sort of workplaces as adults and things like that. But look, so much value in here. So Danny, thanks very much. Really appreciate you taking the time and take care. Looking forward to seeing what happens on your next horizon.
Yes, cheers, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been the best conversation I've had all week. So thank you for having me on.
Cheers, Danny. Bye for
Catch
now.
you later.